Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you, Tara. Right. Well, firstly, welcome everybody to this session of the series to develop national and regional action plans for certainly the Abidjan Convention countries, but also, in fact, this is open to all of Africa. So that is great. What we're doing is we're trying to develop best practice and then a decision-making framework as to what should go into the action plans for nations and also for regions. The program was in fact opened by Abu Bamba, who heads the Abidjan Convention, and that is followed by Linda Godfrey, who was one of the principal authors of the Africa Waste Management Outlook, and she explained how the information from that amazing contribution would contribute to solving the problems and what the problems were and how it would contribute. And this was followed then by a panel discussion on action plans. Then the next session was by Do Steyn, and he spoke about the role of producers and converters and what might be done there to improve the way in which plastics were prepared and could then be placed back in the circular economy in a way that benefited the countries and became part of the action plans. And he gave very much a South African perspective, followed by Daniel Turangai, who actually gave a West African perspective. And today, I'm going to hand over now to Clever Mafuta of GRID-Arendal, who's going to introduce Ieva, who's going to speak to you. So Clever, over to you, and thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Tony. Good afternoon, colleagues. Clever Mafuta is my name, as Tony has mentioned. Together with Ieva Rucevska, we work for GRID-Arendal, a Norwegian foundation based in a small town called Arendal. We're in the southern part of Norway. We collaborate quite closely with the Sustainable Seas Trust, with whom we've got a memorandum of understanding. And we also work in the Abidjan Convention area, where we recently put together a desktop study as part of the process of informing the regional action plan for that region. It's my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Ieva, here, who will be our main speaker. Ieva is a chemist and environmental engineer by way of training. She is currently leading our waste sub-program, and she works quite closely with the Basel Convention Secretariat, where part of her work involves putting together a set of guidelines. There are two sets of guidelines that she's working on at the moment, on household waste and on plastic waste. She's also actively involved in the stock taking of initiatives on plastic waste management, and has got some interest in tracking the transboundary movement, especially of plastic waste. She has quite a long history of working with GRID-Arendal, including a very fair understanding of some of the significant regions of the world, such as the Balkans, the South Caucasus, and Central Asia, where I think she's got a very fair understanding of the geopolitics of that region, as well as the environmental concerns of those areas. She also has interests in environmental crime, and she is an avid applied researcher, as well as a desktop researcher. And she's quite also keen on designing research methods. And today she's going to speak to us about managing raw and virgin materials. Now it's over to you, Ieva. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Clever. So I'm ready. Let's see if I can share my screen and share therefore my presentation so that you see and follow my presentation with visual means.
We can see it.
Yeah, thank you very much. So thank you very much for inviting me. speaking on this very important topic. When we prepared presentation titled Plans to Manage Raw and Virgin Materials, I got some hints from you. What do you want to hear from me? And that was about relevant policy, what regulates raw and virgin materials, and that is in the context of plastic, and how this can apply very practically to your national action plans when you design them. I will put you the subject in a context, and you will see what kind of best practices or what kind of inspiration you get to design your national action plans. So, conventional explanation of plastic pollution is usually linked to understanding of waste management capacities, lack of waste management capacities. We often think that recycling is a challenge because products are not designed for recycling, or public behavior or awareness is not at appropriate level. However, according to calculations, we see that million plastic bottles are bought around the world every minute. So it is not only a waste management issue, but it starts a little bit above that. So, of course, plastic pollution is not only shortcomings of general waste management issue, as I said. However, of course, it is vitally important to have one in place. Developed economies are also facing tides of plastic pollution in the environment, in both in terrestrial environment as well as marine environment. In Norway, for example, this is the country of my residence, waste collection rates are very, very high. It collects almost everything. However, according to the latest report by Keep Norway Beautiful, which is an NGO very keen to keep our nature pristine, they report that each year they collect approximately 2,000 tons of waste were collected from beaches, and most of that is plastic. It seems maybe very little comparing to total 12 million tons of waste generated in Norway. However, this portion does exist. It does also, it does not really reflect any big issues related to microplastics. That number still is unknown. Personal protection equipment, which is very relevant in this COVID time, are also not specific behavior of, or littering that equipment is not specific behavior of specific countries. It also happens here in Norway. When we look at the research, we see that scholars, Borrell with her team, they estimated that there is 90 to 23 million tons of plastic entering ecosystems. That is approximately 11% of plastic waste. If we look and if we put all these numbers in perspective, considering all commitments by government, by private sector and other stakeholders, we see that this leakage will keep quite high. And the estimation by her team is that it will keep between 20 to 53 million tons per year by 2030. Indeed, plastic pollution should be viewed in a broader framework. It should encompass plastic economy and all stakeholders which are around the plastic life cycle. Scholars proposes to cluster 9 plastic economy steps. So it starts with the first step based on the feedstocks. So it is extraction of oil and gas and providing this feedstock for processing refineries and converting to the plastic product in different stages. It can be in intermediate stages and the final application stage. And then we use plastic, and then it enters the final life cycle, so to say. Either it is recycled and reused, then is the best case, and it enters back into manufacturing stage. Either it is upcycled or downcycled. If plastic is end of life stage, it will be disposed at the final disposal places. So the researchers are proposing 9 of those steps. We see that there is a sufficient research around fossil fuel extraction, and this usually we view in the framework of climate change, in the context of climate change. Very seldom, very seldom we view the this discovered extraction phase into plastic pollution context, but it does exist, of course. And then when we look down in the table, we have plastic use towards plastic waste disposal. These are more these are the steps that we are usually thinking when we propose relevant action and mitigate the plastic pollution. So those are also quite well covered if we see at responses. However, what I would like to point out that response mechanisms and all mitigation activities are quite lagging around phase starting from the phase step 2 to step 5. Each of these steps involves several specific stakeholders. An example of stakeholders are given in the table. So when we design possible measures to combat plastic pollution, we also always need to know and always need to map out what are those stakeholders that we are inviting or targeting. To make all this happen, of course, you have enabling factors. You have banks which are giving money, providing money. You have very good loans for investments and so on. So when we are thinking about step 2 to step 5, we also need to keep in mind those external enablers. Chemicals and the energy sector. So how do we use the energy sector when we put in this context? Liquid fuels in transport account for 60% of energy use. So this is the biggest demand, and this is the biggest sector using oil and gas resources. However, when we look at other pies of the parts of the chart, we can see also numbers which are related to petrochemicals. Consumption products in our lives, for example, computers, mobile phones, cars, household goods, derive from petrochemicals and other industries like steel, for example. If we speak about industrial sector, which are based on oil and gas, according to the International International Energy Agency. Petrochemical industry, which is basically about turning oil and gas into all sorts of daily products through polymers. Petrochemical industry is the largest driver of the world's oil demand. So it uses approximately 14% of primarily oil and 8% of gas. So these figures are going to grow quite a bit. And the same agency, the International Energy Agency, they are saying that petrochemicals are set to account for more than a third of the growth in the world's oil demand between now and 2030. So, which is almost doubling by 2050. So I think that this can be also explained by different green policies that we are putting in place. You see that transport demand will decline in the future, and of course it is very. We are seeing here quite good results because. Like green technologies, for example, wind power or solar power, or electrical vehicles in some parts of the world will demand less of fuel for their operations. So very gradually, we will see that plastic outweighs other sectors. Global flow of chemicals from fossil fuel feedstocks to chemical products. So this encompasses the steps from 2 to 6 from my previous slides. Chemicals serve the society in many ways. For example, synthetic nitrogen fertilizers, nearly all of which are made out of oil and gas. Other chemical uses, and especially related to our domestic operations, are, for example, detergents. However, plastic is the key group of products related to petrochemicals. And here you see also that in the graphic. So nitrogen takes part as fertilizer, and then you have plastic, fibers, and rubber as the biggest group of products related to this sector. Basic major chemicals are synthetic propylenes, ethylenes, ammonia, and methanol that forms all sorts of plastic products, which comes from thermoplasts, thermosets, fibers, and elastomers. Important outcome of petrochemical industry is additives that are used to shape the plastic in the required applications. Typical intentional additives can be classified like stabilizers, plasticizers, fillers, or colorants, or, for example, flame retardants. Each additive adds its own functionality, and the quantity may differ from product to product. For example, if we speak about plasticizers or fillers, they can take up approximately 70% of the product weight. For example, PVCs. PVCs we usually use in pipes and other materials. They can take up approximately even higher than 70%, 80% of filling additives, fillers, so-called. Whereas if you compare to other additive types, flame retardants, they can be quite little in products, ranging between 3 and 25% of product weight. I hear that in Africa, you have quite popular product, which is Limex. And Limex is primarily made of calcium carbonate, which is approximately 50 to 80% found in limestones, and a small amount of polymeric resins for binding. This, I have seen that this product is always marketed like alternative product for plastics. And also very often it doesn't contain word plastic in its advertisements. However, we always need to be very mindful what product contains. And usually life cycle assessments are very welcomed and required for new alternative products. That also applies to bioplastics and bio-based polymers, which can be degradable and non-degradable products. So plastic growth scenarios, and I have already mentioned that it will grow, it will heavily grow. We see that in the past, it has been growing ever since, these very small drop downs around global crisis, economic crisis, and it was around 2008. But here, if you look only at thermostats, the production of plastics, and especially here in this case, example of thermoplastics. Thermoplastics are polymers which softens when heated and solidifies upon cooling, allowing them to be recycled and remolded. Thermoplastics are the most common plastics in our daily products, and we are more familiar with this plastic group. They are often classified by the American Society for Testing and Material, which is called in a short name ASTM. And you see here, for example, the most used polymers, which are PETs, high density of polyethylenes, polyvinyl chlorides, low density of polyethylenes, polypropylenes, polystyrines, and other polymers. We see from the graphic that, the production of these polymers will double in the nearest future, and it will continue doubling by 2050. Packaging is the largest product group where polymers are used. And here you see the small graphic saying very concrete numbers. So if you look at the packaging sector, it takes approximately 44% of total use of common polymers. These numbers, of course, can differ. It depends how you look at plastics, whether they include, for example, additives, or in some cases these numbers are doesn't represent numbers together with additives. The data of Geyer in the small graphic in the left-hand side corner, you see that is not representing 1 year, but is actually based on the accumulative data between 2010 and 2015. So when we look at the life cycle approach of plastics, let's see and let's map out how and who, what and how plastics are governed by. So there are quite a number of scholars in looking at the development and all governance issues and mapping out the most important milestones in the past, and especially how it can serve in the future. So I liked very much the clustering proposed by the Graduate Institute of Geneva. And the scholars there, they are proposing to cluster plastic governance development in 3 different phases. Phase 1, which is an early response to plastic pollution around the dates 1968 to 2014. So this particular period encompasses fundamental international pieces of legislation to combat and to avoid the plastic pollution. Those are, for example, London Convention on the Prevention of Marine Pollution by Dumping of Waste and Other Matters, which is one of the earliest pieces of legislation. And then we have MARPOL instruments. Then we have Basel and Bamako conventions. So these are the fundamental pieces which really prepared well our ground for future. So then we have a phase 2, and that is intermediate response phase, which is between 2014 and 2017. This period is really associated with the United Nations Environmental Assembly, the world's highest level decision-making body on the environmental issues. And they do recognize the plastic issue in the environment as a persistent issue which require emerging global responses. The UNEA of 2017 came up with an agreement to eliminate all discharges of litter and microplastic into the oceans. And of course, there are several infrastructures around that enable to continue this work. So the first phase, which is widening focus on plastic pollution issues, and that I would like to say that this is ongoing phase. The recognition of the problem is very, very high. There is political recognition, and there is a lot of activities for action. So the final, the declaration of Our Ocean, Our Future call for action was a strong declaration to start this phase, to kick this phase off. Then you have very fundamental pieces, like, for example, the Basel Convention agreement on plastic waste amendments, amending three annexes related to plastics. The Nordic Council of Ministers, following up on their declaration on developing agreement on marine plastic litter, that was a very strong call to not only to Nordics but to the global forums. And within that work, within that declaration and that promise that they have put on the table, they already designed a report which proposes main elements that should be relevant to a new global agreement to prevent plastic pollution. So this is called Nordic report. And I would really encourage everybody to take a look at this report. It is a very comprehensive piece of work and actually shows how relevant and to what extent it is relevant to developing national and regional actions. In this phase 3, I would say that, that plastic pollution reaches also other organizations, like, for example, trade institution, World Trade Organization, for example, or, for example, global enforcement structures like Interpol and like-minded institutions. So there is a lot of activities happening, and we see these activities arising really after 2015, when the awareness of plastic pollution is really increasing at global scale. There are, again, there are several scholars who are looking really how world respond on this crisis, and if these responses are enough to get the satisfactory result. And if we look how we respond on this crisis, the most common are voluntary mechanisms that we apply to mitigate plastic pollution. And these are around building cooperation on cleaning up marine environment from plastic pollution, building capacity to support waste management and recycling, and support development and implementation of concepts like, for example, circular economy concept. As I mentioned, all these are voluntary activities that doesn't really bind to any deliveries, and it is very difficult to see how efficient are these activities when we would like to reach specific targets. There are regulatory activities, and in my view, those are more stronger because they are binding activities, and these are around physical and product policy changes. There are several online tools that that opens up and give additional resources, and these resources can also be used in designing your regional and national action plans. Like, for example, Scholar Group, which who are published quite an important piece of information, circular economy platform, and the link to this platform is provided in this slide. Basically, it gives you quite a lot of information which is related to plastic in a different thematics, like, for example, trade data. And we know that trade is not only related to waste trade. I mean, the waste it comes from goods, and therefore first we need to see at how plastic goods are circulating around the globe. So they are providing this set of databases, and then they are providing possible policies, or existing, actually not possible, but existing policies And here I just pick up one example from Africa, from Nigeria, looking at policies on plastic waste related issues. So these resources can be explored in more detail and could serve for your purposes as well. Yeah, just one more reaction on this slide. Sorry to come back to it, but all work which is done around voluntary, analyzing voluntary and regulatory frameworks globally, regionally, and nationally, comes to a very clear conclusion that existing responses to plastic crisis and plastic crises which are really mounting, these responses are not adequate to solve the plastic waste or plastic pollution problems. Therefore, more strong measures should be taken. So when we speak about commitments, and I mentioned already voluntary commitments, here I provide only few examples, and there are many of those commitments. GRID-Arendal actually is undergoing a small study looking at those commitments and see how many they exist and what are their profiles, how do they fit in different thematical boxes. So here I would like to give only few examples, like one, the declaration of the Global Plastic Associations for Solutions on Marine Litter. This declaration is actually signed by 75 plastic organizations and allied industry organizations in 40 countries. So this is not a small commitment. It is really very big across countries, across regions. We see also that Africa is part of this commitment, and Africa is represented by Plastic Federation of South Africa. And in the implementation of this very large declaration, there are few projects related to African countries, really few small projects. So if we take another example, in collaboration with UNEP, the Elaine MacArthur Foundation launched the New Plastic Economy Global Commitments in 2018. Again, these commitments are based on voluntary principles. The attendance of this initiative is quite large. You see 250 plus business signatories in different countries. If we look how Africa is presented in that forum, we see that there are some few small scale, very concrete projects, like for example, packaging free zones in 20 stores across South Africa. So it's very small and very concrete activity, but in very limited geographical space. In Europe, we have a very large initiative which is called European Plastic Pact, launched recently, and according to latest figures, there are 142 signatories from 20 European countries. So again, this initiative is quite a big one with a lot of participants, but the efficiency of this particular and other initiatives should be closer looked at and should be always looked at the light in the light of solving global plastic crisis. So we see that we have a lot of initiatives and a lot of activities around this topic. But what are the real reason why we can't solve plastic pollution crisis and why it is so difficult to solve this crisis? And here I would like to come back to my mapping of plastic life cycle steps, and also involved stakeholders. And we see that actually this is a part most probably which gives you some answers on this question, why we cannot solve this very problematic topic. And here I'm giving you key reasons, and one of them is low costs of feedstock prices. Of course, it is not a secret that that it is much cheaper to make new plastic from virgin material rather than recycle. We see that over the last year, and actually last year, the oil price was dropped down to $19 per barrel, which is most probably one of the lowest numbers in history. Whereas you compare with scrap plastic prices, which are, for example, only for one polymer, polyethylene, per ton is approximately, well, here I'm saying in pounds, but approximately 65 to 320 pounds per ton. So, I mean, there is no possibility to compete with very low feedstock prices. These feedstock prices are low and going to be most probably low. They do not include in any environmental costs, and maybe this is why they are so low. So demand for plastic is projected to be high and to grow over time. Consumption, of course, of developed economies is the highest one. And we see that it goes 140 kilos per year, whereas the consumption in developed economies are very low, which is approximately 30 kilos per year. However, of course, that consumption in developed economies are growing, and it is also, of course, understandable due rise of urbanization, incomes, and consumer behaviors. Also, social factors are at stake. Investments in petrochemical sector are expanding by private and public sectors. It grows globally, and it grows very, very sharply. According to the American Chemistry Council, between 2013 and 2017, the accumulative investment in petrochemical industry grew from $72 billion to $185 billion. So this accounts for investments externally and internally. And these investments, these are the numbers as of today, but it is predicted to grow. China is playing a very big role in petrochemicals. They are announcing to build a mega petrochemical complexes which can produce many tons of polymers. African continent is not big player in this respect. However, there is industries attempt to expand to African continent, and for example, a US-Kenya trade deal was agreement which was seen especially by the civil society sector, civil society players as the possible expansion to Africa. Of course, petrochemical sector, as it grows, it provides a lot of revenues and jobs. So it is very difficult, of course, so it's just something that also people welcome quite at large extent, and a lot of let's say communities are built around this economic activities. And the industry is, of course, linked to wider strategic geopolitical and security interests of government. So there are a lot of thematical areas which we should keep in mind when addressing new measures to plastic pollution. So the importance of upstream steps or part of life cycle, which is usually less talked about, is very important. I'm picking here up just a mapping or just a scheme which is provided by Nordic Council of Ministers. This report I have referred to, and I really propose that participants who are interested in particular measures are taking a look at this report. And there are several examples that can be explored and, of course, adapted to your particular cases on, for example, regulatory measures, on market-based measures. Regulatory-based measures are often linked to bans on single-use plastic, or market-based measures can be virgin material taxes and like activities. So Nordic report provides really a very nice and comprehensive ideas, not only on one block of measures, but it covers entire life cycle of plastics. So I really recommend that participants are taking a look at it. So yeah, I think here I would like to stop and be open for more questions that maybe came through my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eva. There's a comment in the chat box that says that the person is from the European Environmental Bureau, and regarding plastic pollution, they recommend looking at Break Free from Plastics if people haven't looked at it yet, and that they have an overall comment about the problem when seeing the activities done so far by different stakeholders focusing on only plastic waste management, which they feel is misleading, and the real problem is too much plastic on the market, especially single-use plastic. As long as we don't have activities aimed at cutting plastic consumption, we will see more plastic pollution. Do you want to comment on that at all, Eva? I certainly don't think a global pandemic helped with the use of single-use plastic. But Eva, would you like to add any comments?
Well, I think that this is well depicted. Actually, that was the also purpose of my presentation. I think that very often we see plastic pollution related more to waste management aspect, and of course it is essential step in measures, but plastic production and plastic consumption is very often overlooked, and you have a lot of material and really very nice pieces of information that leads you to the same conclusion. And as I mentioned at the beginning, that well, it is. I mean, we are after 2040. There is a lot of thinking and a lot of intellectual thinking. What needs to be tackled and how it needs to be tackled. Of course, it's not always very easy. But thank you very much for the comment.
Thanks, Ieva. Everyone, please, just a reminder that there is a question and answer box if you'd like to send your questions through there. There was a comment on the last statement from Chris that says, agreed, but we're fighting against commercial reality that is too big for us to fight. We need to look for a solutions-based approach that creates a vertically integrated approach to adding value to this waste. Ieva, would you like to comment at all on that, about the adding value to waste rather than focusing on just handling plastic waste? Sorry.
Adding value, of course. I mean, we should recycle all what is possible. Recycle, reuse, and these activities, related activities, will always put less pressure on resources. And I would like to say that and remind that all this is coming from oil and gas mostly. So directly and indirectly we put pressures, like I already mentioned, that climate change issues has been always seen in the frame of fuels and gasoline use. However, it is more. I mean, it becomes more obvious that petrochemical industry that serves us with different plastic products is actually is one of the reasons and could be linked to climate change. Responses.
Thank you, Ieva. There's a question that's come through in the chat that says, regarding the Global Plastic Declaration, Africa is represented. I want to know which are the other member countries in Africa, and is Cote d'Ivoire one of them? If so, could I have the country referees? Are you aware of that?
I think that South Africa, I think that was what I remember. I haven't seen other countries, African countries, but it may. I mean, these pieces of information. I mean, also these responses, they are quite open, and I mean, maybe not today, but very soon there will be another country joining. So, yeah, these are open initiatives.
Thank you, Ieva. There's another question that's come through in the Q&A box that says, would it not be possible to negotiate in order to revise upward the prices of raw materials in order to finance the actions of recovery and recycling of plastic waste? So the raw materials then.
Yeah, I mean, the raw materials, they are most probably underpriced. So they do, as what I mentioned, they, first of all, of course, as question already or comment already points out, they cannot be competitive in markets, especially with recycling prices. So there should be some kind of mechanism put in place. Either there are subsidies or any other fiscal support to recycling, and reflect, on the other hand side, reflect real price of raw materials. So far, I think that this doesn't really reflect, especially environmental part of this story.
Thank you, Eva. There's another question that says, does anyone have information about the US-Kenya deal to export unrecyclable plastic waste to Kenya? Would it all be a complaint with the Basel Convention?
Well, I cannot maybe add more on the US Kenya trade agreement. My sources are open sources, which I read from, let's say, public announcements. But I would be very interesting to see, especially maybe from civil society groups, where are we with this agreement?
Thank you, Eva. Would you like more information about the US-Kenya deal in order to comment?
Well, I can. I have not enough information to cover to comment on this deal.
Okay.
I mean, it's. I don't know how much is available. How much is available on the internet.
All right, sorry, I think there was just a slight delay on my end. There was another question that says, the circular economy is one of the solutions to reduce plastics, especially in the oceans, but how can we reverse the trend in our countries in terms of plastic use? That was sent by someone from Abidjan.
Yeah. We have to be very mindful about what we use and how we use. I think that in EU geographical, European Union geographical space, there are very concrete political responses in terms of concepts like circular economy and Green Deals, as well as it is supported with very concrete, hard, let's say, regulatory pieces like directive on single-use plastics. So it's basically elimination of plastics that are not really necessary or not vitally important for living. For example, catering objects or something similar. So these are soon to be phased out from the market, and I think this is really very very brave and very very good regulatory action that can minimize the consumption part. So it is not only in hands of consumer to buy or not to buy, but it is basically not available in the market at the first place. So this kind of initiatives, or not only initiatives, but regulatory measures can help quite a lot at plastic use phase and production phase, of course.
Thank you, Eva. I think you make a very good point there in that in the design phase, designing products to be to be compliant with the circular economy would go a long way towards reducing the creation of plastic waste. Someone has posted a link in the chat about the US-Kenya shipments of plastic. But I was just wondering, you mentioned a report earlier. Would it be possible to share the URL to that report just in the chat so that people can refer to it at a later stage?
I mean, the US-Kenya deal, or which report you are interested in?
The ones that you were referring to in terms of the open source reports. the Norwegian one?
Yeah, the Nordic.
Yes, yes.
Yes. I think that all sources are listed in my presentation. Yeah, I mean, there are several resources which I found quite interesting in this particular context. Yeah, here you are, Nordic Council of Ministers 2020, possible elements of a new global agreement to prevent plastic pollution. That is the report that could be consulted and maybe should be consulted.
Thank you, Ieva. I don't see any more questions coming through here, but you're welcome to send those through. I'm not sure if there was a bit of a lag there, but there's also been a comment that came through that mentioned that Ghana is joining South Africa in the Global Alliance. I think that was in reference to the question you answered earlier. There has been another question that came through now. It's just in French. Just one second. The question was, would it not be possible to negotiate in order to revise upward the prices of raw materials in order to finance action of recovery and recycling of plastic waste? I think you did refer to that earlier.
Well, yeah, yes, I did, of course. And I mean, the prices also can be influenced, and it can be influenced by regulatory mechanisms, incorporating different aspects. And what I mentioned, that, for example, prices of raw material are not incorporating any aspects on environmental side. So I think that here is really room for direct responses.
Thank you, Ieva. I don't see any more questions or comments yet, but Clever has sent through the link to the Nordic reports, I think. Then there's another question that says, a rather technical question, they say. What do you think about the technology of molding low-grade plastics and extruding them into plastic bricks? It seems to be quite popular in some African countries, but what is the exposure leakage of plastics or additives?
Yeah, it is a very good question, and we have to be very mindful with all proposals, how we what we do with plastics, how we upgrade or downgrade. As I mentioned, there are questions around chemical composition and also, I mean, future problems or unexpected outputs, like if we use plastics for roads or any other construction materials, it may create a source of microplastic plastic leakage. It's, of course, it depends from solution to solution, but I think that life cycle analysis and mindful examination of those, let's say, solutions, alternatives, are always required and necessary to make a good decision, because we see that sometimes we take fast decisions and we arrive to a new problem. To avoid this kind of things, I think life cycle assessments and environmental impact assessments are required to choose the best solution.
Thank you, Ieva. And as was mentioned, I think in a previous workshop, that the use of plastic waste into different items then will constantly require the production of plastic waste. So it's a bit of a circular issue there.
if I may point out a very important issue, which I already mentioned in my brief talk about additives and chemical composition. So we always need to, I mean, it is difficult. It is difficult to know what a product contains. Even they have labels and claims on them. However, doesn't disclose all necessary information in most of the cases. But accumulative, accumulation of additives in new products, intentional or not intentional additives, is always the issue, especially when we speak about recycling and bringing one product and recycle or upcycle, for example, to a new product. So additives, chemical composition is important aspect.
Thank you, Eva. In terms of the additives, would that be in terms of what the plastic waste is used for as a sort of secondary source, in terms of plastic bricks or things like that? Just in terms of that the additives would limit the uses for it as an upcycled or a downcycled product?
No, additives is part of the product. So they actually they form the product, and it can, of course, it can go to the next phase when it is recycled, or it can leak into final place of plastic, like for example landfills or dump sites.
Thank you, Eva. That's great to know. We don't seem to have any more questions in the chat or the Q&A box at the moment, but if anyone does have any of those going forward, you're welcome to email either us or to email Eva directly if you have any questions. For now, Eva, I'm not sure if you want to add any more comments before we start wrapping up for today.
No, I remain very open if there are more questions, or if somebody wants to have more sources, input material, references, or precisions even to my presentation. You're most welcome to write me an email, or or contact me by any social media channels.
Thank you, Eva. It was really wonderful to hear your talk today, and great to hear about all the chemistry in the background. I think that's really valuable in terms of adapting the way we do things for a more sustainable future for plastics. Then there's a comment in the chat that says, "Thank you. It was very interesting. Can you share your email?" Which I think you had at the end of your slide. So in your last slide, it was Eva at GRID, as far as I know.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. It was wonderful to hear your talk today. We will have another session coming up on Thursday, which will be looking at the actions to manage different plastic polymers, which is along a somewhat similar vein. So we invite you all to join us again on Thursday to hear from Annabi Pistorius. In the meantime, we really appreciate you taking your time to join us today. Would anyone like to add anything before we close?
Just a very sincere thanks from me, from Tony, and to encourage you to come to the talk on Thursday, because Annabi is one of the real plastic gurus. She understands plastics, and she's a great teacher as well. So if you want to learn more about these sorts of things, she'll be absolutely amazing. But Eva and Clever, thank you very much. We so enjoy our relationship with GRID-Arendal, and the quality that you bring to the associations within Africa are marvelous. So thank you very much indeed. And we look forward to seeing everybody else on Thursday. And of course, GRID-Arendal is more than welcome on Thursday as well. So thank you very much to all of you. Thursday is our next stage.
Thank you, Tony. And thank you, Ieva and Clever. It was really wonderful to have you here with us today, and we hope you're able to join us as well on Thursday. The advert and the registration link can be found on our events page on the SST website, and we look forward to seeing you all there. If you do have any questions for us or for Ieva, please feel free to email us and we can pass those along. Thank you, everyone, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and that we see you all on Thursday.